good while ago, and I do a lot of those kinds of talk shows. I was on a talk show, and the host wanted me to answer questions by callers. As you may or may not know, I make people angry. I've never understood that. I'm loving and kind and not a threat to anybody, but some reason they get angry. And an angry guy called up. He was an Adventist, Seventh Day, and he was angry that I worshiped on Sunday and gave a pile of reasons why the Sabbath was not Sunday, why I was disobedient to the clear word of God. By the way, I love Seventh-day Adventists. And in my seminary classes, I've had a lot of young Seventh-day Adventist guys preparing for the ministry. And I often preach in their churches. But this man was really angry, and he went on and on and on. And then he challenged me, and he said, "Who told you that Sunday was the Sabbath?" And I said, "My mother." "Are you calling my mother a liar?" Dead silence. Don't ever say anything bad about Santa Claus or mothers. And this morning, I'm not going to say anything bad about Santa Claus, but a caution about mothers. And I want to introduce you to one, and a very interesting and informed incident that took place with her. If you have a Bible, and I note that most of you don't, there's something to be said for self-righteousness. And you have no idea how good it felt to say what I just said. So you're going to have to trust that I'm reading it right. It's from the 20th chapter of Matthew, and I'm going to start at the 20th verse. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, "What do you want?" And she said to him, "Say to these two sons of mine that they are to sit one on your right hand and one on your left in your kingdom." And Jesus answered, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink?" And they said to him, "We are able." He said to them, "You will drink the cup, but to sit at my right hand and my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." And when the 10 heard it, they were indignant. Indignant at the two brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, for whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be last and your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." James and John were the boys. They were the sons of Zebedee, and they were among the closest friends of Jesus. In fact, the top three. Just so you know, James was the first one to die as a martyr. And John was the last one to die. Jesus called them, and it was a name he gave to them because he was fond of them. He called them sons of thunder. That means they were not quiet. They were brash, sometimes in your face. In fact, James and John remind me of Tullian. And in a moment, we're going to look at some things that Jesus taught them and the other 10 disciples, and I can hardly wait to get to it. But first, let's go down a side road and look at Mary. Mary was the half-sister of Mary, the mother of Jesus. That means that she was close to Jesus, watched him grow up, watched him blow his nose, maybe even changed his diapers. And sometimes, and it happened when Jesus went back to his hometown, when you're that close to greatness, you can't see it. But she did. Everybody else thought he was a wandering Jewish rabbi, but she knew he was a king. And her request was inappropriate, but her heart and her faith weren't. She came to the right place. One time, Napoleon conquered an island kingdom, and the general primarily responsible for the success of that battle, and a friend of Napoleon's, was approached by Napoleon, and he said to him, "What can I give you by way of thanksgiving for what you have done in this battle?" And the general said, "Give me this island that I may rule over it." The other officers were shocked at the request, and Napoleon granted it. And do you know why? Because he said of the magnitude of the request that honored me. I may have told you before, but we have a daughter, Jennifer, who years ago, the day she was born, was very sick. She had a blood count rising rapidly. She had a leg that wasn't getting nourishment, and they called a specialist, and he said in 20 years he had never seen a leg like that. And the doctor said, "Mr. Brown, if you know how to pray, you probably should." I didn't. But I'd met some Anglican charismatics shortly before that time, and they knew how to pray. And so I went to them. And I never forget their joining hands and going before God in a language I didn't understand. But in the English, they said, "Father, our brother has a little girl who's in trouble. Could you intervene in Jesus' name?" The next morning, the doctor called, or my wife called me from the hospital. And she said, "Honey, did anybody pray last night?" And I said, "Yeah, they did." And she said, "The doctor came in early this morning and said, this is miraculous. The blood count is normal, and the specialist is no longer worried about the leg." In those days, I was a liberal intellectual. You have no idea what an incident like that will do to the mind of a liberal intellectual. I was probably a deist. I knew there was a God, but I thought he started it and went on vacation. And all of a sudden, he intervened in my life in a special way. And first, I didn't understand, because I had friends who had babies, and those babies had died, and they loved God, and they served him, and I didn't. And secondly, the God I thought was on vacation had specifically entered my life in a wonderful and miraculous way. Those charismatic Anglicans honored God by the magnificence of their request. Have you done that? We do almost anything, but we really don't believe God answers, so we go everywhere else. Don't do that. Tullian prayed about a sovereign God before we began this worship service, and he is, and he's good all the time, and he will be honored with your request. Your boy's gay, your girl is transgendering, you lost your job, the doctor told you you had cancer, the dysfunctions of your past are coming back, you failed and blown it, and you think God is through with you. Listen to me. Honor him with the magnificence of your request. All right. I get Mary, by the way. As I said, Mary was the half-sister of Mary, the mother of Jesus. But she reminds me of my mother. When we get home, I'll introduce you to her. Betty, my friend, was close to her, and they loved each other. My mother was mean as a snake. I mean, she said awful things to my brother and I, but if you said them, she'd break your face. When I was in grammar school, I had a teacher who, and it started early, who was angry at me for some reason. I hadn't done anything, treated me terribly, and I told my mother. And my mother said, "She's your teacher, respect her." But the next day, unbeknownst to me, my mother visited that teacher and scared the spit out of her. All of a sudden, that was the nicest teacher I'd ever had as a kid because of my mother. My mother, and this is true, read the Bible in the morning and Spurgeon at night, and in between, she taught me how to cuss. Now, that's a good mother. But let me tell you about her. Boy, she stormed the gates for her boy. She's just like Mary. Father, give them favor. Keep them close to you. Honor them. Help them to do great things for you. My mother didn't hear what Jesus said about that. If she had, she maybe wouldn't have prayed that prayer. Jesus, can you drink the cup I can drink? That, of course, is the cup of rejection and suffering and the cross. And the boy said, of course we can drink your cup. And Jesus said, you don't even know what you're asking. Besides, it's not mine to give you. My Father's going to decide that somewhere down the road. And then the disciples, their self-righteousness, insufferable. How could they? They're probably not even saved. After all that Jesus has done, they had the gall to come before Jesus and ask for the right hand and the left hand of his throne when he gets it. And Jesus heard it. And he said, guys, come here. Now, I don't believe Mary was there. After her initial request, she is not mentioned anymore. She's gone. And you don't know, but I know, because Jesus is a friend of mine. He said to Mary, Mary, we'll see. You have things to do, and I know how busy you are. I'm going to talk to these guys for a little bit, and I'm going to let you go. And I think she left. And then they had a come to Jesus talk about self-righteousness. And what Jesus taught is so cool. I can hardly wait to share it with you. Listen, and it'll change your life. The first thing Jesus said, in order to get what you want, you have to stop wanting it. That's crazy. You want to be great? You want authority? You want people to look up to you? Then quit wanting it. Mark Twain was one time talking to a group of very wealthy businessmen, and he said to them, "Someday, men, you will meet someone who has nothing and is happy. And at that moment, you will know that you paid too much for your whistle." My late mentor, Fred Smith, and I miss him a lot. I did his funeral. Did I tell you? And he showed for his funeral. A week before he died, knowing that he was dying, he recorded a video. And it was in Dallas, and there were these big screens all around the sanctuary, few thousand people there. And I look up, and there's Fred grinning. And he said, "Seeing as how there's so many people here, it'd be a shame for me not to say something." And he presented the gospel in a simple and wonderful way. But Fred, and I heard him say a lot, wealthy people are the most miserable people on the face of the earth. And the first time I heard him say that, I said, "But of course, that's what riches will do to you." And he said, "No, it won't. If you've got money, it's better." But the problem with the wealthy is that they've spent their lives getting there, and when they got there, it's not what they wanted. He said, "A poor man has hope. A rich man is hopeless." I've thought about that. I've thought about, in order to get what you want, you gotta stop wanting it. How do you do that? I want hair. I've been praying for it for a very long time, and I'd like to be rich. I'm tired of my Honda. I want a Mercedes. And I wish my books would sell better. I need the money. I wish I would be praised and honored in the right circles. How do you get over that? You get over it by the first law of wing walking and the principle of substitution. The first law of wing walking is this. This is airplane wing walking. And the law says, don't leave hold of one thing until you've got a hold of something else. And the something else was Jesus. And it's not a religious thing. That would be not enough to fix it for me. It's not a church thing. That, heavens, won't be enough. When I was a pastor, there was never anything I couldn't fix without a few funerals. It wasn't being nice or even being obedient or even righteous. It was being hugged by Jesus and being able to walk with him into every dark place and every sin in my life. That's worth a fortune, and it's worth more than hair. In order to get what you want, you got to stop wanting it. And the only way you can stop wanting it is to find something greater, more amazing, more precious, more exciting than what you've got. And then there's another thing that's going on here. Jesus said, in effect, if you want to be righteous, quit trying to be righteous. Paul Tournier, the late Christian Swiss psychiatrist, was speaking to a group of Christians, and he had a Q&A session at the end. Somebody asked him, Dr. Tournier, do you know of Christians who don't live it? And he said, but of course, me. He got it. And therein was his greatness. I have a friend, and she's an amazing artist. I always knew that. She does her art in clay, and her pieces are breathtaking. Well, finally, in Atlanta, the world has recognized how great she is, and she's being shown in some of the great galleries in Atlanta. When it first started, they took public relations and advertising pictures of my friend, and they brushed it. They took away the blemishes she had on her face. And she was livid, and she went to the PR people and said, put the blemishes back. God gave me those. The power is in the blemishes. It really is. Let me tell you something, and you need to remember this. God will either allow you to sin greatly, or he will allow you to see the greatness of your sin. And he will do that because he loves you. You have the most honest pastor I've ever known. I used to judge students in their preaching by how often I said, I don't believe I'd have said that. And if I said it more than 3 times during their sermon, they got an A. Since Tullian was 6 years old, I've been saying, I don't believe I'd have said that. And I've said about him so often, I don't believe I would have said, but he's so honest. John Frost, who's a part of this church, and he's in Denver today, I told him if you love Jesus, he'd be here. He said, look out for Tullian. And he said, I have never met a pastor with as little armor as Tullian Chavigian. That's true. You know why? Do you know why God is doing stuff in this church? Because of that. If you want to be righteous, quit trying to be righteous. The reason we're so bad is that we're working so hard to be good. Oh man, I was a pastor for a whole lot of years. In fact, I did it for so long, I don't need Jesus to get to heaven. When I die, they're gonna say, you poor dear, you come on in. But I've seen so many people I love work so hard to please the God who is already pleased. Chill out. You're gonna be better. Deal with it. You don't have any, you can't do anything about it. You're going to get better, and someday you're going to look like Jesus. So forget about trying to be righteous. Just dance and sing. That brings me to the final thing that is implied and taught in this particular text. Jesus said you got to be a slave. So if you want to be free, you got to quit trying to be free. It's not an intentional act. It's a gift that you live in and you don't work for. Somebody sent me the greatest statement, and I love it. It said, she danced like nobody was looking, but we were looking, and she looked like she had had 12 shots of Jack and had been caught in a spider web. That's the way the world looks. You know why? Because they work to be free, and they didn't get a hold of something else. You're free because you're loved. Deal with it. You're free because you're forgiven. Rejoice. You're free because you're His. Does that mean you can go where you want? Yeah. Be what you want. Oh, yeah. Say what you want. Oh, yeah. And dance and sing before the God of the universe. Sometime, and I'll come back if you'll invite me again. Most places won't do it the second time. If you invite me back, I'm going to preach a sermon on the benefits of not caring. Boy, that would go. As a matter of fact, the people who change the world don't give a rip about changing the world. That's true, by the way. You know what I did 3 or 4 months ago? I spoke at the graduation of my granddaughter at a university where she graduated. And they gave me another phony doctorate. I'm not even a nurse. And you know what I said to those kids? I said, you're very fortunate to have me. That's not because I'm good looking or so smart. It's because I'm old. And when you're old, you don't give a rip. So if you want to know the truth, you've got to listen to an old person, because they're not trying to get anything out of you. They're not trying to manipulate you, and they will tell you the truth. So you're fortunate to have me, so listen up. What I'm going to tell you is the truth, and it's important. And they did. And I had a great time. What I didn't tell them is that I had learned not to care a long time ago before I was old. I had to hide it because I needed the job, but I really didn't care because I cared about Him. I loved Him. I wanted to be with Him. I wanted to dance and sing because of Him. I don't know, never knew Jerry Falwell. I preached at Liberty University and quoted Tony Campolo and made him mad, and I'm not going to go back. But I did stay in the house where Jerry Falwell lived. And the guy that took me there in my suitcase said, you know, sometimes Jerry walks, you know, he'd been dead for years. And he said sometimes he walks because he's not pleased with people who sleep in his bed. And I thought, I hope Falwell doesn't show up tonight and rob me of my sleep. At any rate, I didn't know him, but there were some things I admired about him. I was invited by the head of the American Jewish Committee, whose home was in Miami, to go to the Fontainebleau Hotel one time. This has been years ago, to hear Jerry Falwell as he addressed the American Association of Rabbis. I mean, rabbis from all over the country and around the world were at the Fontainebleau, and I got a chance to go. In order to get into the place where he was speaking, we had to get by people who were picketing. But I got in the balcony, and I was sitting with my friend and fiddling with my Christian ring, thinking nobody knows I'm a Gentile. And it came off my finger and rolled 2 rows in front of me, and the rabbi picked it up, bought it up, and gave it to me and smiled. and said, "Enjoy this, Reverend." And I'm thinking, it's just me and Jerry. I hope he does well. And he did. He talked to them for maybe a half an hour. And you could tell from their body language they weren't glad to have him. Then he had a Q&A period at the end, and one of the rabbis stood up and said, "Dr. Falwell, what is it you want from us?" And Falwell, God bless him, said nothing. "I have everything I want. I came here to say to you that I'm going to be your friend. And even if you don't want me to be your friend, I don't care. I'm going to still be your friend. I came here to say to you that I love you. And even if you don't want me to love you, I'm going to love you anyway." You know what happened? They gave him a standing ovation. That's when I held my hand up with my ring, saying, "I'm with him." That's what we are. We don't matter. You're free. You're already righteous. It's his righteousness. You don't have to want anything more. And he sends us into the world. And if you listen to what I taught you, you know it now. To say to the world, "I love you. And even if you don't want me to love you, I'm going to love you anyway." You think about that. Amen.